And in a conversation with people at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, they said, well, people who come to Yosemite already know what Yosemite has to offer. And I said, that's great. What about the other 7.5 billion people on the planet? And I thought, what would it take for us to create an environment where you could look across the harbor and see how it looked 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago?
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
I would bet if you're listening to this podcast right now, and you probably are because that's how you're hearing my voice, you probably have a smartphone. And I'm not one necessarily to advise you on which apps to keep on your smartphone, but there's a cool little app I have on my phone that I can't recommend highly enough. It's called Radio Garden. It lets you zoom in on any city or town on the globe and listen to radio stations there. And there is one, and I'm not talking about NCPR here, even though you can listen to it on Radio Garden, but there's one that's always fascinated me, and it sounds like this.
Hot potatoes! Hot potatoes! Chicken ball! Yellow ball! Potato feet, he's got and more!
That's a station called Arctic Outpost Radio in the town of Longyearbyen on the island of Svalbard, spinning 78s from 77 latitude, as they say. I'm glad they broadcast online because they are an AM radio station, and I'm pretty sure their signal does not reach the North Country since it is, in fact, a few thousand miles away. North Country filmmaker Scott Carroll will soon be among the lucky few who can pull in Arctic Outpost Radio, provided that on his trip to Svalbard that's coming up, he brings along a radio. Scott Carroll will be on a fellowship called the Arctic Circle Expeditionary Residency Program, and he's here in the studio to explain exactly what that is. Scott Carroll, thanks for stopping by.
Hi, it's great being here.
All right, so I have a general sense of where the island is. I might even be able to pick it out on a map, but beyond the geography, what makes Svalbard unique?
Well, to begin with, it's the last year-round inhabited, it's the most northern year-round inhabited place on the planet. Go to Norway, go to the north of Norway, and then go another 1,000 miles, and that puts you in the neighborhood. So it's the last landmass, it's really the last inhabited outpost, about 400 miles from the North Pole.
Why in the world did people settle there in the first place?
You can blame America for that. It was an unsettled area. There was no indigenous tribe or population there. An American in the it might have been the 30s, it might have been earlier, discovered mining there and started open. And his name, I believe, was Longyear. So the capital city there is Longyearbyen. And it was largely populated with Norwegian and then later on Russian and Ukrainian miners.
Well, you say the capital city. I mean, it's really the only city of any real population, and even that's not very many.
No, it's about 2,500 people. There's two smaller towns in the area that are 400 or 500, and those are mining towns.
And it's sort of ostensibly part of Norway, but it's really an international territory?
It's incredibly unique in this. You don't need a passport. You don't need a citizenship. You don't need a visa. It's currently administered by the Norwegian government. In the past, it has been run by the Russians and the Soviet government. And it's sort of done with a permission from Russia, and that's how it's been operating.
Well, and when we were setting up this interview, you sent me a couple of pictures there's still some sort of ghost towns that were left by the Soviets. Right.
There's a Soviet mining town called Pyramiden that still has a statue of Lenin and has the hammer and sickle, and it's right out of the television show Chernobyl, or if you want to step back to 1950, 1960 Russia. It's a perfect time capsule. The gymnasium there still has the basketball sitting in the middle of the floor. They literally up and left, and they left the possessions, and they took bare bones with them, and everything else was and so it's a complete ghost town. Originally, I think it had about 1,500 civilians that were living there.
So why do you want to go there?
Well, I'm heading up for a number of reasons. Partly through my film work, but a lot of it, I've started a software. We've built a software program around climate. We started this about 5 years ago, and the premise was simply how do we bring this to the individual, and how do we have it so that how do we create a platform that anybody can tap into and see what their life is going to look like, or their front yard, or their neighborhood, or their town in 50 years, or 75 years, or 100 years. So this was sort of a nexus of filmmaking and my filmmaking background, both as a documentary and as somebody who's worked with Hollywood, and my interest in science and my background in the environment. And this sort of became the culmination, in many ways, of most everything I've ever done. I spent a good part of my career racing as a Nordic skier. I've spent a lot of time in places like this, and Svalbard in particular is ground zero for the climate change issues that are happening. The Arctic and Antarctic are precursors to what's going to hit the rest of the planet. For example, when I was in Sweden in the early 90s, they built the first indoor cross-country ski facility on the planet in like 1990, 1991 in Sweden, which you would think.
Right. Why would they need to?
Why
Yeah.
Sweden? But,
yeah.
We knew this was coming. We could see it. Certainly in the Nordic community, we saw it coming. So the fellowship came to my attention. It was a wonderful opportunity to spend 3 weeks on a research vessel with researchers, climatologists, journalists, and other artists to capture this and bring some of it back and really in hopes of presenting in a more immersive way and a more relevant way to everybody else what this is like, what's coming. I think the tendency has been you go to places like this, you take a couple photographs, and people see it and go, okay, that's great.
Yeah, wow, look, there are icebergs behind it.
Right, and then they move on to what are we going to have for dinner and this sort of thing. So when we started Project View, the idea was how do we make it relevant and individualistic and immersive to every person who uses this app.
Well, and obviously most people are never going to make it anywhere near Svalbard.
Absolutely. Some of this started, I did a pilot project for University of California at Merced in 2013 that was based at Yosemite. And in a conversation with people at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, they said, well, people who come to Yosemite already know what Yosemite has to offer. And I said, that's great. What about the other 7.5 billion people on the planet? And after that conversation, I was standing on the observation deck looking out into San Francisco Harbor, and I thought, what would it take for us to create an environment where you could look across the harbor and see how it looked 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago?
Well, and so do you have some sense already, or is this going to be something that really only the 3 weeks there and how you're able to process it afterwards is going to allow you to do some sense for how you might integrate what you get out of this fellowship with the software that either already exists or a project yet to be determined? Did that question make any sense?
It does. And I think whenever you look at a project like this or this kind of trip, there's an element of purpose. I'm going here to collect special effects and sound and visual and get atmospherics and these sorts of things. But there's also sort of an understanding that I'm putting something in the bank for later. Mm-hmm. So part of this for me is to go into witness and be there and stand there and have it surround you because, and this is the other part of this, is that when you see something on a flat screen, there's a fourth wall that needs to be broken. So when we sat down with this concept 5 years ago, how do we break through that fourth wall? How do we make it relevant to anybody who, whether it's Svalbard or McMurdo or the Amazon or Canton, and how do we make it relevant to them?
And that is an answer yet to be determined, at least when it comes to Svalbard, obviously. But
yeah, well, I think you never can fully predict, when you've captured some of these atmospherics, what you're going to do with it. I can say in terms of the app, we've built into the platform these spots around the world that you'll be able to not only visually but audibly hear when you go and you open up the app and you go into it. Ideally, you want to future-proof the technology so that as technology changes, you're able to adapt it And so whether we do VR sound on this and some of these sorts of things with the idea that somewhere down the road we can plug that into a different environment.
That was going to be my next question, actually. Whether and maybe it seems silly to even ask this question, but this is AR or VR. I mean, to immerse people, you really have to surround them with the visuals and the sounds.
You do. It's I think James Cameron did it best when he did the Avatar series, and that was all new technology. He spent about $4 million out of his own pocket to create the technology that allowed that fourth wall to be broken. Our version of this is we're working with some of the CGI people who worked on Lord of the Rings. And they've been very actively advising and been part of this process, along with the academic community and Google Earth and a few other partners on this.
And presumably not $4 million out of your own pocket.
No.
We're talking, obviously, before you leave. How much do you feel like you know about what your time is going to be like in those 3 weeks there?
I've spent a lot of time in and around the Arctic Circle. I ski trained in Kiruna. I've been to Barrows and Churchill. I skied in the northern part of Greenland. I did some backcountry skiing there. This is a unique environment. I mean, this is a place where the fossils date back to Pangaea, and they're largely equatorial fossils, and they're just lying on the ground. You know, you've got polar bears and walruses and all those critters running around. We're planning on capturing sound above and below the water. So we're going to be doing some of that. I think a lot of this is just being in the space and being present and just being open to whatever the opportunities are as they present themselves. One of the nice part of this will be we won't have cell phone and there won't be Wi-Fi because you don't get it that far north. Once you leave Longyearbyen, there won't be any of that. I'm concerned about the condition of my inbox when I return, but I can live with 3 weeks of not having any emails to field, so I'm all right with that.
What is the ability to do this sort of also in the presence of all of these other artists and journalists and other people who are on this fellowship mean to you?
The collaboration is hugely important. Having those diverse perspectives, some participants who are coming in, there'll be about 20 of us from all over the world. This is a fully operational sailing research vessel. So there'll be labs and things on board. We'll be disembarking using Zodiacs getting on land every day. I mean, there's just no question our eyes are going to be opened, and the collaboration alone is just going to, it's an exponential opportunity.
Well, and presumably, given the sort of fragile state of things up there, one of the keys to this has to be having the least sort of physical impact on the places that you're visiting.
Absolutely. And, I had the option to get a drone pilot license. They offer a few of them up there every year. And I weighed it back and forth and just decided ultimately it wasn't worth the impact it was going to have. That's footage that it's already been shot. I can find that from other sources. And as it turned out, Svalbard just announced in the last 6 weeks that they're going to be canceling all drone flying in the future at the end of 24. So whatever's captured up to this point will be it. And I think they've become aware of that. I mean, part of the issue with places like this is ecotourism. On one part, you want to make these places available for folks to come up and get a sense of what's at stake and what these places in the world are like. But by the same token, the harbor's filled with cruise ships in the summer, which is adding to the problem. They're having, an increased level of permafrost melt. They've had mudslides. I'm following their weather, obviously, intensely before this voyage, and it's been pretty much nonstop avalanche warnings since mid-February. So every day my phone's either yellow or orange on the avalanche thing. So, how do you bring these places to people in a way that's not going to have as much impact on them?
It is a conundrum because to be able to do that, you do physically have to go up there to bring these stories back. But by going up there, you're having that impact that you're trying to argue against.
And it's something that I've wrestled with. And I am convinced that there are places on the planet that we should just not be in and just leave them as they are and let them get along the way they need to get along. Longyearbyen's become a pretty big haven for tourism. There's 35 different cultures who live there, and they've got some high-end restaurants, and they've got chefs who are coming up from, Central and other parts of Europe. 4-star Michelin chefs are coming up there and opening up restaurants. It's a very unusual. I said to somebody the other day, I imagine the first permanent settlements on the moon and Mars will be somewhat like this, where you'll have this gumbo of cultures, and in an area that's not heavily administrated, that's not, Longyearbyen, for example, Svalbard in general is one of the few places on the planet it's technically illegal to die there. It is against the law. If you're sick or they fly you to mainland Norway, they don't have hospital, they don't have medical services, and they don't bury people there because it's permafrost.
Well, and of course, the reason that the 4-star Michelin chefs can practice up there is the tourist trade caters really to the wealthiest people who can make it up there, and these are the kinds of amenities that presumably they want, while at the same time having an authentic Nordic experience.
Yeah, I don't know how authentic it is.
Well, right.
That's a tough argument when you're on a cruise ship or even a small cruise ship having a 4-star meal. If you're sitting on the deck watching, it's almost in a way like visiting a zoo.
Yeah, right.
You sit in the lap of luxury and you have that moment. So I tend to focus more on the micro moments and more at ground level, not omniscient view, but more at where I'm standing and capturing sort of those micro moments. And that's part of what we'll be doing is capturing those and then bringing those back.
It's interesting because I was sort of reacquainting myself with Longyearbyen before this interview, and you go to Google Earth and take a look at the aerial view. And first of all, I was dazzled to see that it was bright sunshine, which I don't imagine happens every day. But there was this large cruise ship at dock, and it was dwarfing everything else that was in the image.
Yeah, and people I've talked to who've been up there, and and some of the guides I've talked to who work there they discuss this extensively. I mean, it's part of their bread and butter, but in the height of tourism season in the summer, there's 4 or 5 cruise ships sitting in the harbor. In terms of daylight, we just turned midnight sun happened on the 20th, so we're a couple days past it now. So I'll be arriving at 24-hour sunlight. So I'll be doing a lot of filming and soundscaping at 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning.
You have to be kind of excited about this, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, there's always the logistics angle. And as a filmmaker and film producer, you're always thinking, do I have enough microphones? Do I have enough cameras? Is this going to work? Is that going to work? What happens if this happens? But, I'm within days of leaving, and most of the details have worked out. And I'm very excited about this next step and what's coming.
I'm sure it's very easy to get to Longyearbyen from the North Country.
If you have a secret, and please, I'd happily like to hear it. No, it's I'm driving to Boston and flying to Copenhagen and then Oslo and then Tromsø and then north from there. So,
is there an airstrip on Svalbard?
Yes, yeah, they have a full airport. They don't get a lot of flights per day, but yeah.
Well, Scott Carroll, thank you so much, first of all, for previewing this, your experience with us, and we'll look forward to hearing what comes out of the trip.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Scott Carroll is an award-winning filmmaker who divides his time between the North Country and Vermont. He's one of a couple dozen people en route to the international territory of Svalbard on a fellowship called the Arctic Circle Expeditionary Residency Program. You'll find a link to more about the program at ncpr.org/northwards. Hey, we do this podcast every week, and here is producer Ethan Shanty with a list of the great folks that make it all possible.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.